I pretended to be a broke single mom for a year. My fiancé said, "I can't marry a woman with no money and a kid." I just nodded. At our engagement dinner, his family went silent when, I'll come back to that moment. Because to understand why that silence almost broke me, you need to know how I got there. That night started like any other quiet evening. Rain tapped against the kitchen window, slow and steady, like it was thinking about something too. My son was asleep in the next room. One sock on, one sock off. He always did that. I stood by the sink, staring at a cracked plate I kept meaning to throw away. I didn't. I never did. When Mark said those words, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. That was worse. He said it calmly, like he was explaining the weather. "I just need stability," he said. "I can't take on someone else's problems." Problems. That's what my life was to him. Me. And my child. I remember nodding because my body didn't know what else to do. My throat closed up. My ears rang. I felt small, like I was standing at the bottom of a well, looking up at someone who had already decided to drop the rope. He didn't know I had money. He didn't know I owned an apartment under my maiden name. He didn't know the savings account I'd built quietly after my divorce. And he didn't know that the experiment I started a year earlier was about to end. But a year before that conversation, I really was struggling. Or at least it felt that way. I met Mark on a cold October afternoon. The kind where the sky is gray, but not dramatic about it. Just tired. I was sitting in a cafe with my laptop closed, pretending to work so no one would talk to me. My son was at daycare. I remember the smell of burnt coffee and cinnamon. Mark asked if the seat across from me was taken. He smiled like someone who had always been liked. He was easy. That's what I thought at first. Easy to talk to. Easy to laugh with. He listened when I talked about my son. He nodded in the right places. He asked questions that sounded caring. On our third date he said, "I really admire single moms. You're strong." I remember feeling proud. Seen. Chosen. I didn't talk about my past much. About my divorce. About how my ex slowly erased me with words, not fists. How he controlled every dollar until I forgot what my own signature looked like. How leaving him felt like jumping into freezing water, but staying felt like drowning. Mark didn't need to know all that yet. I wanted something normal. Something calm. When Mark asked about money, I told him the truth. But not all of it. "I get by," I said. Which was true. I just didn't say how. The first time I noticed something was off was small. Almost invisible. We were at the grocery store. I picked the cheaper brand of cereal. Habit. Mark laughed softly and said, "Wow, you really think like someone who's used to being broke." He said it jokingly. I laughed too. But something inside me tightened. After that, it happened more often. He'd comment on my car. On my clothes. On my simple lifestyle. "You're low maintenance," he said once. "That's rare." It sounded like a compliment. But it also sounded like a limit. 6 months in, he proposed. Nothing fancy. No crowd. Just a ring in my kitchen while my son colored on the floor. I cried. I said yes. I believed him. That night, after my son fell asleep, Mark talked about the future. "I want a clean start," he said. "No debt. No surprises." I asked what he meant. He hesitated. Just a second. Then he said, "I don't think it's fair for me to support a child that isn't mine. At least not financially. I need a partner who brings something solid." That was the moment something in me woke up. I didn't fight him. I didn't cry. I said, "I understand." But I started watching. Listening. Testing. I stopped offering to pay when we went out. I talked about bills more. I let him believe the story he already wanted. And Mark changed. He became colder. More distant. He complained more. He started saying things like, "Love isn't enough, and real life isn't a fairy tale." Still he stayed. Because I was convenient. Because I asked for nothing. A year passed like that. Slowly. He proposed again, officially this time, with a dinner planned with his family. His parents. His sister. His uncle who didn't like anyone. I wore a simple dress. No jewelry. My hair tied back. I looked exactly like the woman they expected. At the restaurant, the lights were warm and low. Silverware clinked. Wine glasses caught the light. Everyone smiled too hard. Mark's mother asked about my work. I said, I manage. His sister asked about my son's father. I said, we're not in the picture anymore. Then Mark raised his glass. He laughed a little and said, there's something we should probably be honest about before this goes any further. My stomach dropped. He looked at me. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just honestly. I can't marry a woman with no money and a kid, he said. I need more than love. The table went silent. And that's when his family learned something Mark never expected them to hear. The silence was thick. You could almost hear the rain from outside creeping into the room. Even though the windows were closed. His mother's fork hovered in midair, her lips pressed tight together. His father leaned back, shoulders stiff, eyes narrowing like they were trying to pierce through me. His sister just stared. Not a word. Not a blink. Just that slow, unspoken judgment. I felt my heart pounding so hard. I thought it might break the skin. My son's face flashed in my mind, sleeping innocent, unaware of how the world could be cruel to the people who deserved the most. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. Mark looked at me, waiting for me to explain, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to beg. But I didn't. I couldn't. I'd rehearsed this for months in my head. Not the words, but the silence. The calm, the control. He would never know that my stomach had been twisting in knots for a year, pretending, hiding everything. His mother finally spoke, and her voice was softer than I expected, almost disappointed. You lied, she asked. I nodded slowly, letting it sink in. Yes, I did. Mark's hand gripped mine under the table. Tight. Almost painful. But I didn't flinch. I let it burn. Let it remind me who I was. I needed to see who you really were. I whispered, mostly to myself. The table was quiet for so long. I could hear the servers moving plates in the kitchen. You know, the kind of quiet where everyone's listening for the tiniest sound, because even breathing feels like betrayal? That quiet. Then his father chuckled. Low, dry, like smoke sliding through a hallway. Well, this is interesting. He shook his head slowly, looking like he'd just discovered some small, unpleasant truth about the world. We thought she was something else. Mark's grip tightened. His jaw set. His face pale. Mom, Dad. No, let her finish, his father said. I want to hear this. All of it. And I did. I told them everything. Not in a dramatic confession. Not with anger. Just the facts. About my divorce. About the control, the gaslighting. The long nights when I cried into a pillow so my son wouldn't wake. About working 3 jobs to scrape by, saving every cent. Building a life for us that was real and ours. About how I pretended to be fragile, just for him to reveal what kind of man he truly was. By the time I finished, my mouth was dry. My hands trembled. My heart felt like it had run a marathon. And the room was still quiet. Mark's mother's eyes were wide. Shocked, yes, but also maybe something else. Something like respect. Not for him. For me. And that made the silence heavier, because I realized that all this time, no one, not even Mark, had really seen me. Mark didn't speak for a long time. His sister looked at him like she just realized she didn't know her own brother at all. His father shook his head again, slower this time, not in judgment, but in disbelief. I thought I knew, Mark finally said. His voice was tight, shaking. I thought we were building something real. We were, I said. You just didn't see it. That was the thing about Mark. He didn't understand struggle. Not really. Not the quiet, invisible kind that doesn't leave bruises you can show. Not the kind where you carry someone else's future in your back pocket and keep moving forward. Even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when you're alone. After the dinner, I walked out with my son in his stroller, the rain now falling harder, cold drops soaking through my coat. I let it. I wanted to feel it. I wanted something real on my skin. Something that wasn't fake smiles or polite lies. We walked home in silence. I watched him sleep in the stroller, tiny chest rising and falling, hair sticking to his damp forehead. I thought about the year I'd spent pretending. The nights of budgeting every cent, of missing family events, of holding back tears because someone had told me that love wasn't enough. And I felt free. But freedom doesn't come all at once. It creeps in slow, almost unnoticed, like the way rain soaks through your coat before you realize you're wet. And I knew Mark wouldn't let it go. Not quietly. Not easily. The next morning he called. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. 4 times. Finally he left a message. I can fix this, he said. I can. I didn't reply. I didn't even listen. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat down at the table with my son's drawings scattered around me. I traced one with my finger, a crooked house, a sun with too many rays, stick figures holding hands. And I realized, maybe for the first time, that I didn't need anyone to see me to be strong. Over the next few weeks, Mark tried everything. Flowers, texts, late-night knock on my door. He even showed up at my son's school pickup, saying he wanted to talk. I refused. Every time, I felt a twinge. Yes, a small bitter pang. But I reminded myself of all the nights I'd spent pretending to be powerless, all the times I'd let others define me. And I realized something important. Pretending was my power, but only because I could stop. Only because I could choose. The truth was heavier than any lie I could tell. But it was mine. And no one, not Mark, not his family, not anyone, could take it from me. By the end of that year, I had become someone I barely recognized in the mirror. Not because I had changed who I was, but because I had finally let myself see it. Every scar, every bruise, every late-night panic attack that I'd survived, I carried them all like armor. Mark. He moved on. Found someone simpler. Someone without a complicated past. Someone who didn't fight back. And I began to laugh again. Small things. The way my son ran to hug me every morning. The smell of rain on the sidewalk. The sound of my own voice telling the truth. But the story wasn't over. Because pretending wasn't just a game I played with Mark. It was a lesson. A test I'd set for the world. And the world had failed him. I had a plan. And I was ready to see it through. The morning after I finally shut the door on Mark, I felt like I had been holding my breath for a year. My lungs ached, my chest felt hollow. And for the first time in forever, I could breathe. I made coffee and sat at the small kitchen table in our apartment. Sunlight spilled through the blinds in stripes across the floor. And for a moment, it looked like a promise. I looked at my son. He was drawing again, that same crooked sun, stick figures holding hands. I smiled softly. He didn't need to know what had just happened. He didn't need to know how the man who said he loved us had quietly judged us every single day. He just needed me. And I needed him. But even with the relief, there was a strange, hollow ache. It wasn't heartbreak exactly. It was betrayal. The slow, gnawing realization that someone who claimed to care could be so shallow, so calculated, so cruel in ways I had never anticipated. And worse, the thought that I had let him almost define me. Even after all the years of surviving my ex-husband, I started noticing things about myself that had been buried. Little patterns, habits, moments of fear I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I flinched at sudden sounds. I double-checked locks obsessively. I hesitated before making decisions, always imagining someone else's judgment waiting behind the curtain. Mark had triggered something buried deep inside. A mix of old wounds and the quiet anxiety of being judged again. And then there was the plan. For months, I had been quietly saving, quietly building. Not to prove anything to him, but to prove something to myself. I had a tiny apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a savings account with more than enough to live comfortably for a while, and skills I'd honed under pressure. Negotiation, planning, survival. I had learned to take nothing at face value, to measure everything, to see people clearly before they saw me. It had started with small things. I bought a second-hand laptop, not for work, but to manage my personal finances. I started reading legal guides quietly, learning the loopholes in contracts, leases, and tenant rights. I knew one day I might need them, and that day seemed closer than I wanted to admit. Weeks passed. Mark tried contacting me, each attempt more desperate, more frustrated. He called late at night. He sent flowers and vague apologies through texts. He showed up at my son's school, smiling that easy, fake smile he always wore when he wanted something. I let none of it in. Each attempt reminded me how careful I had been, how easily a life could be manipulated if you weren't vigilant. And then came the first real twist. One evening, I returned from picking my son up at daycare, juggling a bag of groceries in one hand and his hand in the other. There was a man sitting in the apartment lobby. He looked familiar in that sudden, wrong way. The kind of familiarity that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. "Hi," he said casually, almost too casually. "I'm Derek. I'm a friend of Mark's." I froze. My son tugged on my sleeve. "Mama, who is that?" I swallowed. "Just someone I don't know," I said, tightening my grip on his hand. My mind raced. Derek wasn't just a friend. He was part of the machinery Mark had built around me. The little lies, the quiet manipulation, the way he tried to shape my world without me realizing. And now here he was, standing in my building like he owned the place. "Can we talk?" he asked. Calm. Polite. That tone that makes you think you're safe, but you're not. I didn't answer. I carried my son upstairs, ignoring the feeling of my stomach sinking. But Derek didn't leave. I saw him at the window later, watching. And I knew then that Mark wasn't done. Not even close. That night, I lay awake thinking about the past year. The pretending, the constant calculation, the lies, the betrayals. I realized that Mark had never been the real threat. The real danger had been underestimating me. I started planning quietly. Not revenge. Not exactly, but preparation. I would need documentation, evidence of his manipulation, everything he might try to hide. I would have to show the truth without it looking like a trap. I realized then how much I had learned from my ex-husband. How to read people, how to anticipate moves, how to survive by staying calm, even when the ground seemed to crumble beneath me. Weeks turned into months. I balanced work, parenting, and my quiet mission. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my family, no one. It became a solitary exercise in focus, determination, and patience. I started noticing the little details about Mark and Derek. Patterns in messages, timing of calls, social media updates. I documented every interaction, every lie, every half-truth. I learned the rhythm of deception, and slowly, methodically, I built my strategy. And then came the moment that changed everything. One night, I got a message from Derek. Wrong number, he thought. He said, "Meet me. I have information about Mark." I didn't reply. I didn't move. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my veins. I knew it was a trap, but I also knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to face it. The next day, I prepared. I made sure my son was at daycare. I drove to the cafe, where Derek wanted to meet. My hands shook, but my mind was sharp, every nerve alert. And when I walked in, I saw him, smiling that casual smile again, trying to make it look harmless, friendly, ordinary. But it wasn't. I sat down across from him, and he slid an envelope across the table. "Everything you need to know about Mark," he said. I opened it slowly. Inside were emails, texts, photographs, all of it. Evidence of deception, betrayal, and manipulation that Mark had tried to hide. Every lie he had told, every calculated move to control me, documented in cold, undeniable black and white. I stared at it, my stomach twisting, my mind racing. And I realized, this was the turning point. The next phase wouldn't be quiet anymore. After Derek handed me the envelope, I didn't speak. I just sat there, staring at the papers, feeling my chest tighten in a way that was equal parts fear and anticipation. Every lie Mark had told me, every manipulation, every carefully hidden secret, it was all there. He wasn't just shallow or cruel. He had been methodical, calculated, almost clinical. I left the cafe without a word. Derek tried to follow me, but I walked faster, my mind a storm of thoughts. The rain had started again, cold drops hitting my coat and sticking to my hair. I let it soak me, let it numb me just enough to keep walking without breaking down. Back in my apartment, I spread the documents across the table. Emails with drafts of apologies he'd never sent, texts where he joked about controlling me, even a few messages to his sister where he called me naive and easily manipulated. My hands shook, my stomach knotted, and for a moment I felt the old familiar rush of panic. But then I felt something else. I smiled. Not a small smile. Not a timid, afraid smile. A full, sharp smile. Because now I had the power. Not over him exactly. Over myself. Over the story. Over the truth that no one could take from me. The first plan was simple. I couldn't confront him head-on yet. Not directly. That would be too obvious. Too messy. But I could start planting seeds. Small hints, little truths, letting people around him see a reflection of who he really was. His family. His friends. Even his colleagues. I started slowly. A text to his sister, carefully phrased. Hey, did you know Mark has been sending me emails trying to manipulate me? Thought you might want to know. I watched the typing bubble on her side, then waited. She replied carefully. I didn't realize. That was all I needed for now. The idea had been planted. Meanwhile, Mark's calls became frantic. I ignored them. Every ring felt like a drumbeat, reminding me of the year I had spent pretending, hiding, surviving. Each ignored call was a small victory, a reclaiming of power. But then came the second twist. One morning, I found a package at my door. No name. No note. Just a box. Inside were photos. My son sleeping, playing in the yard at the playground. Someone had been watching us. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I'd faint. Fear wrapped around me, sharp and icy. Mark. It had to be him. No one else knew we were here. I panicked for a minute. Only a minute. Then I reminded myself. I had been preparing for this. I called a friend in security, someone who owed me favors from years ago. He told me exactly how to handle it, from checking cameras in the neighborhood to installing trackers. I was methodical, calm. The fear was there, but it no longer controlled me. For days, I slept with one eye open, watching, listening, planning. I noticed how Mark's desperation started leaking into the people around him. His sister texted more often, almost accusatory. Derek started avoiding me once I stopped replying to his calls. And Mark, oh Mark, he was unraveling without even knowing I was watching. Then the big moment happened. I arranged a meeting with his mother. I told her everything. Not the envelope from Derek, not the texts, not the photos. Just the story. My truth, my experiences, my survival. I saw her eyes widen. Saw her lips press tight. Saw the first real sign of doubt creep into her carefully maintained expression. You've been through a lot, she said finally. I had no idea. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. I didn't want anyone to think I was weak. But now you should know. You should see him for who he really is. She didn't say anything else that day, but the look on her face told me enough. The family had been Mark's shield, and now the cracks were forming. Over the next month, the tension ratcheted. Mark tried everything, calls, texts, showing up at my apartment. Nothing worked. Every attempt made him seem smaller, weaker, desperate. And I documented it all. Every word, every action, every hint of his unraveling. I remember one night, standing in the kitchen, staring out the window at the city lights, my son asleep in the next room. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had survived a year of pretending, a year of manipulation, a year of constant judgment. And now, finally, the scales were tipping. I thought about the irony. A year ago, I had pretended to be poor, powerless, fragile. I had played a role that almost broke me. And now, using the tools I had gained in that role, I was stronger than ever. Stronger than anyone had expected. Stronger than Mark, certainly. But it wasn't just about him. It was about all the people who had doubted me, who had looked at me and said, "You can't." Who had thought I was small, unimportant, replaceable. I wasn't. And I would make sure they all saw it in their own ways. The final confrontation was approaching. I didn't know the exact day, the exact moment. But I felt it. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the storm was coming, and yet feeling ready to face it head on. And when that day came, it would change everything. The day finally came when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Months of careful planning, of collecting evidence, of letting Mark and everyone around him unravel, had led to this moment. I wasn't nervous. Not like before. This time, I was steady. I was ready. I arranged a dinner. Not at a fancy restaurant. Not somewhere public, but at a private place. A small rented hall with long tables, soft lighting, and just enough space to let everyone breathe. I invited Mark, his parents, his sister, even Derek. Not that Derek mattered much anymore, but I wanted all the pieces in one place, visible, undeniable. Mark arrived first, like he always did. Calm, controlled, that fake smile plastered across his face. I could see it faltering already. He knew something was off, though he couldn't name it yet. I waited until everyone else arrived. His parents came looking wary, polite but guarded. His sister's expression was sharp, suspicious. I could feel the tension stretch like a string across the table. The air was heavy with unspoken accusations. I started calmly, almost too calmly. "I want to tell you all something," I said. My voice echoed softly in the quiet room. "Something you should have known long ago." Mark shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted his wine glass. But I ignored him. I kept going. I laid out the envelope from Derek. Emails, texts, photographs, everything. Every lie Mark had told, every manipulation, every attempt to control me. I spoke slowly, deliberately, making sure each word landed. His parents' expressions shifted. Disbelief, confusion, then anger. His sister's face went pale. Mark tried to interrupt. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He wanted to argue, to defend, to manipulate, but the room was full of witnesses now. Everyone could see what he was. Everyone could hear the truth. And that's when I saw the change. His mother looked at him like he was a stranger. His father's hand shook slightly as he adjusted his chair. Even his sister, the one who had always sided with him, stared at him in disbelief. For the first time, Mark was powerless. "You lied to me," I said finally, locking eyes with him. "For a year, you tried to control me. You judged me, humiliated me, made me feel small. And you thought I wouldn't see it." He looked at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then anger flickered across his face. "You tricked me," he said. I smiled. "No," I said softly. "I survived you." The room was silent again. The tension was almost unbearable. And then it happened. His sister spoke. I didn't know," she said, voice shaking. "I thought." "You thought wrong," I said. "And now you see him. For who he really is." Mark's hand tightened into a fist. He wanted to argue, to push, to manipulate. But I had anticipated it. I had recorded, documented, planned every angle. And no one was on his side. I watched him crumble. Slowly. Piece by piece. The man who had judged me, who had dismissed me, who had tried to define me by what he thought I lacked, was powerless. His armor, his charm, his control all gone. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Satisfaction. Not cruel satisfaction. Not gloating. But the quiet, deep sense of rightness that comes from surviving, from standing tall when the world tried to knock you down. After the dinner, I left the hall with my son. We walked into the night, the city lights reflecting off wet streets, the air crisp clean. He looked up at me and smiled. I held his hand tighter. I realized then that this was the only victory that mattered. Not revenge. Not proving Mark wrong. But protecting the life we had built, the world we were creating for ourselves. Weeks later, I sold the apartment I had rented for the confrontation. I moved us to a new place, somewhere small, safe, ordinary, but ours. The memory of Mark and everything he had tried to impose on me faded slowly, replaced by laughter, routines, and tiny victories. The freedom I had fought for wasn't flashy, but it was real. And the irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent a year pretending to be powerless, pretending to be fragile, pretending to be someone I was not. And in that pretending, I had learned everything I needed to survive. Everything I needed to protect myself and my son. Everything I needed to be stronger than anyone had expected. Sometimes late at night, I still think about Mark. About the man who thought he could control me with words, with charm, with judgment. I don't feel anger anymore. Not really. Just a quiet acknowledgement that he underestimated me. That he thought he could define me. That he failed. I am not fragile. I am not powerless. I am not defined by anyone else's expectations. I am the woman who survived, who protected her son, who faced betrayal and manipulation and came out stronger. And I know now more than ever that real strength isn't about control or appearances. It's about endurance, clarity, and the courage to finally stand and say, I am enough. The rain falls sometimes, soft against the windows. My son laughs in the next room, oblivious to the battles we fought, the truths we uncovered. And I sit here, quietly victorious, knowing that the life we've built, our life, is untouchable.